First and foremost, I would like to thank Kevin for extending the invitation to be here tonight. I understand that this is behalf and dedicated to the Terry Hampson Dinner, and also would like to acknowledge his dear wife, who I've got the pleasure to share the table with, and I would also like to acknowledge Auntie Peggy and thank you um, for your address in the opening in terms of the acknowledgement to country. Wow. So I'd like to thank the Queensland Fabians Society for inviting me along tonight to speak to you all. I'm grateful for the opportunity and humbled that you might actually think I've got something useful to speak about or say. Ngai mina klima, apapudis, ku brother mabagal, turubulo, yagara, mabagal, kai, kaipakulai, awagala mabagal. Ngai lak mina klima apapudis, ngai, ngau, brother mabagal, saibai, ngai kudalau kutalag, ngai samoa kutalag, ngai zayo gubalag, ngai sagir gubalag, ngai mina klima apapudis, murabuayo, saibai no, zenatkias, kai, kaipakulai, awagala mabagal. It is with profound sense of responsibility that I stand before you tonight because I carry with me the echoes of the countless stories from our community. Each story woven together creates a vivid tapestry of resilience, strength, and unwavering spirit that refuses to be silenced. Maybe that's why I've made my career as a storyteller. I was 28 years of age when I auditioned for the SBS series called Remote Area Nurse. At that point in time, I think it was around about 2004, my life was pretty much off the rails. I'd made a few bad decisions, I'd stuffed things up, and I was living and kind of hiding up in Sacia, right up there in the tip of Cape York in the Northern Peninsula area, living with my grandmother, my beautiful, fierce grandmother, and surrounded by community, by people who knew me and loved me. Frankly, it was a surprise to everyone when I was offered a major role. For me, the fact that I actually got a break, the fact that I actually scored a win when I auditioned for Remote Area Nurse, the fact that some outsiders thought I might have some talent. Well, that was huge for me. It was absolutely huge. It also became very clear that Remote Area Nurse was huge for my community as well. That show pushed boundaries to show locals speaking to each other in language with subtitles for the English viewers. The language included the Kalakaua language, the language of Saibai Island that I used now in my acknowledgement. Remote Area Nurse was a series well ahead of its time. For sure, the financial boost that the production gave to the local economy was incredibly valuable. And perhaps even more importantly, it gave it was the first time my people were seeing their stories on screen, were seeing and hearing themselves on screen. You can't put a price on that. All of that was crucial, an extremely crucial lesson. And it's that lesson that stayed with me. Yes, I've had a career as a storyteller, but I've also worked hard to ensure that my stories have wider purpose. What is that purpose? To amplify the stories and voices of Torres Strait Islanders, and to use the film and television industry and the skills I've gained within it to drive cultural change and regional development, to genuinely change lives. Torres Strait Islanders, as Australia's other Indigenous people, are the minority within the minority. It's extremely hard for us to have our voices heard. Torres Strait Islanders make up 8.6% of Australia's Indigenous population. But I can tell you for sure that we don't receive anywhere close to 8.6% of Indigenous screen industry funding or input, or a similar proportion of any other Indigenous funding for that matter. I have to be careful here what I say, because these days I sit on the board at Screen Queensland and also the board of SBS. But now I've had the opportunity to see under the hood, so to speak, and to see line items and see funding allocations that just don't quite add up. Screen Australia's Indigenous unit has been around for 30 years. Still, there are only a handful of us Torres Strait Islanders on screen. Well, go on. Guess if you can think of any other Torres Strait Islander other than me. So, my people rarely see themselves on screen, let alone see their own stories playing out. The shows my production company produces in the Torres Strait are an attempt to change that. An ongoing Torres Strait TV series or screen series would change that. When I was a kid, popular culture didn't reflect my life or my family. So I took my cues from wherever I could find them. During the 1980s, the West Indian cricket team were unbeatable. They were outstanding sportsmen, beloved by all Australians. And they were cool, so cool, man. For a while there, I was a little kid who regularly spoke with what I hope to be a Caribbean accent. Vivian Richards, Joel Garner, Gus Logan, the Whispering Death, Michael Holdings. Best of all though, those West Indian cricketers all looked like they could be my uncles. It was the first time I could watch a whole team of black men on TV, all being celebrated for what they could achieve. But remember that we had to learn that they were cool. We had to learn their accents were one to envy, man. There's a show on TV on the ABC right now. You might know it. It's called Death in Paradise. It's a cozy PG rated show. The original is set in the Caribbean. The remake is set here in Queensland. And every week they solve a murder. The Caribbean version rakes its socks off. I reckon partly because they like looking at tropical locations and partly because their accent is so cool, man. Now don't get me wrong. It's great that they remake. The remake is set here in Queensland, but I reckon there was an opportunity missed. Imagine for a minute if there was a show set in the Torres Strait. In production terms, it would be hard. The infrastructure's there. Qantas flies in and out daily. You could have the fish out of water English detective. You could still have the tropical location, but you'd have the language of the people in our own Creole accent. Hey, we say, Mala, one end. Hey, they're not gonna make it. Death in Paradise. Oh, wow, yeah, with Torres Strait. Ha ha. Now that'd be cool. Plus, the boost it would give to the local economy, directly as well as indirectly, would be unbelievable. The one small tweak in location would absolutely change lives. That's why I've spent the last few years or more working to bring the film and television industry to Far North Queensland. One of the deals I'm very proud of is in 2020, the Queensland State Government committed $15 million to building a film and television production studio in Cairns. People had been talking about wanting a studio in Cairns for about 20 years or more, particularly once they saw how successful the studios were down here in southeast Queensland. But that multi-million dollar commitment was a result of some hard work by local MP Curtis Pitt. He was the state treasurer in 2018 when he asked me to join his proposed film studio working party. Together, we spent a better part of 3 years building a business case and making it happen. White fellas and black fellas together. We, yes, you, I, Aaron Farso, Kevin Conway, and the Fabian Society have to work together. We have to make those small tweaks that will have enormous impacts. In the spirit of the great leaders who have walked this earth, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, Eddie Koiki Mabo, I address you not just as a First Nations man, but also as a proud Australian, but even prouder Queenslander, who believes in the power of unity, understanding, and a shared purpose. My dad passed away when I was about 6 years old, and my brothers and I were raised by my mother and my grandmother. And I'm here to tell you, those women set high standards for us boys. Their expectations were and still are extremely high. My mother, well, she's a small woman, tiny, and she speaks quietly. She rarely raises her voice. Now, when I was a kid and when I was in trouble, it was still calm. Hey, son, she'd say. And that's all she needed to say to know that, uh-oh, she's mad. I was still going to get my ass kicked, and things still haven't changed. Right on top of the list of expectations was service to family and to community. And now I'm finally at the point of my career when I can use the industry, use my profile to serve my community. I have the opportunity to amplify and elevate social justice issues, to advocate for the underdog. But so do you. So do you. Tonight I'm asking you, use your work to drive change. Use your professional skills to drive change. Because don't tell me to tell my mother to come and see you. Reflecting on the time as co-chair of the interim Truth and Treaty body, I find myself profoundly grateful for the journey we embarked on together, co-authoring the treaty legislation with dedicated individuals like Uncle Mick Gooder, Michael Lavash, and Natalie Siegel-Brown. Was not just a task, it was a calling. It was an opportunity to give voice to the Torres Strait's rich cultural heritage, to acknowledge the deep roots of First Nations people in Queensland and advocate for the diverse tapestry that defines our identity. History teaches us that the journey towards justice and equality is rarely straightforward. It is marked by struggles, sacrifices, and a relentless pursuit of truth. As First Australians, we are subjugated to the narrative that often marginalises our voices, reduces our existence to political football, and overlooks our rightful place as leaders in our communities. But it's time to change that narrative. Despite the failure of the Voice Referendum, despite the recent dismantling of our Truth Treaty Institution and truth-telling inquiry, it's time to change that narrative. Because if not now, then when? It is time to craft our policies that reflect our needs, aspirations, and identities, not just as an afterthought, but as a cornerstone of genuine progress. I don't mind telling you that the failure of the Voice and the dismantling of our Treaty Institute and the truth-telling inquiry, these things are heartbreaking. They're devastating. For me personally, and for First Nations communities through this country. The people who, behind the failure, behind that dismantling, should be deeply ashamed. Frankly, I'm embarrassed for them. And I stand before you emboldened by the knowledge that our fight is far from over. Our journey together, our journey towards recognition and respect hasn't stopped. And it's a legacy we will pass on to future generations. But we have to work together. I'll say it again. White fella, black fella, together. Together, we must forge pathways where First Nations communities lead rather than follow, where our wisdom guides policies instead of being swept aside in the currents of political manoeuvring. The call I bring to you tonight is not merely for acknowledgement, but for active collaboration, an invitation to listen, learn, and lead alongside First Nations communities. The Fabian Society has the potential to be the beacon of hope in this endeavour. Your influence can shape policies that recognise First Nations leadership and involvement as fundamental, not just as a token gesture, but as genuine commitment to elevating our voices. There's no need to wait for constitutional change. You can start providing First Nations peoples with a voice right now. Tonight, I ask you, who have you identified as your First Nations cohort? Who have you identified as your First Nations cohort? Whose voices are the Fabian Society elevating as you seek to influence Queensland and federal policy? How are you ensuring right now that strategies, policies, and legislation are not just well-intentioned words on paper, but are infused with the insights and lived experiences of First Nations peoples? In honour of Terry Hampson, a man of honour and integrity who believed in the power of collaboration and activism, let's commit to forming consultative groups that include First Nations elders and leaders. Let's create a space where our voices are heard, our ideas valued. It demands that we stand united in the spirit of truth and healing. Together, let us confront our shared history, the painful truths of colonisation, the injustices faced by the stolen generation, and the ongoing struggles that persist. And let us also celebrate our profound resilience and the rich cultural heritage that is an integral part of this land that we all share together. Let's unite. So I ask you, who are you lifting up? Whose voices are you amplifying in the halls of power? Let's turn well-meaning words into impactful deeds, ensuring that legislation is steeped in the lived experiences of First Nations communities. Let's unite as advocates for a future where Queensland acknowledges and celebrates Indigenous history, a future vibrant with opportunity, not just for ourselves, but for the generations to follow. Together, let us rise beyond rhetoric to co-create a just and equitable Australia, a legacy that stands as a testament to the power of unity, understanding, and unwavering hope. In closing, I express my hope for dialogue, for partnership, and for a commitment to forging a better Australia. Together, let us rise to the occasion, not just for ourselves, but for the future generations who will inherit the legacy that we create today. Kimeso. Hearing Auntie Peggy's remarks really kind of, I felt that the leaders that have gone before us. And also, I really want to acknowledge those who aren't with us anymore and those great leaders that have fallen. And to Anne Hampson, your husband, for all the great work that he did and all the work that we are yet still to do.
Oh, what a fabulous, thought-provoking speech. I would like to know if anyone has any questions for Aaron. And if you do, I will come over and you can speak to Aaron.
It's a sort of three-pronged question, Aaron.
Ooh.
You've talked about the importance of telling your stories on the screen. How important do you think it is for First Nations actors to be cast in roles that are not Indigenous? For example, that you could be cast as a city lawyer, a suburban teacher, a rural doctor, or whatever. Secondly, if you think that is important, how much, and I do, I have to say, how much progress has been made? Has enough progress been made over the years for that to happen? And if not enough progress has been made in that direction, so that First Nations actors are seen as actors, not just First Nations actors, where does the responsibility lie? Is it your agents? Is it lobbying with the professional associations of producers and directors, or whatever? So over to you.
Okay. Thank you. Well, great questions. Look, I think as a film and television practitioner, I think we've been advocating for the colourblind casting, where we should be able to, be able to fulfill any role with any profession. We've got doctors, lawyers, we fulfill every part of society. So I think we need to start reflecting that in popular culture as well. I think I feel that it's also on, I guess, the responsibility of broadcasters as well in the boardrooms. That's where true change happens. There's a macro, I guess, change that needs to happen, where we are elevated into more boardrooms across the broadcasting networks, but also fulfilling the other boards that influence and drive, I guess, change that we are still looking for. Because I think whilst there's been great, I guess, progress made, I think more could be done, especially across the commercial networks. The ABC are going through some interesting times at the moment. SBS, I think, with the elevation and amplification of NITV over the last, certainly in the last 7 years, now that NITV are now switched over to HD, I think it's going to have some profound changes in progress over the next 5 years. But as actors, I think there still needs to, I guess, it's with the agents, it's with the industry as a collective that we still need to further shift and make those positive changes that that we're able to sit in any role. Because if we're being reflected in the boardrooms and in every profession that you can think of, from corporate government to your bricklayers and so forth, to every layer of society, it'd be great for that to be reflected in popular culture as well too. But look, I think there's been great progress made, but as always, there's always room for improvement. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes. Okay. Aaron, as you're talking, I guess I was reminded a bit over a decade or so, we had a change of Conservative government in Canberra and we had the Climate Authority. Abbott immediately abolished it, but civil society came to the front and crowdsourced it, and it's still operating today. Do you see potential with the Truth and Justice Committee, Truth and Treaty Committee, a similar grassroots thing that could keep the hearings going despite the government?
Look, I think there needs to be a real, I mean, such societies as the Fabian Society are really important. And I think these are the grassroots. This is where the change happens. Yes, it comes back down to the political government of the time, but also we need to also make those systemic changes that need to happen through also the corridors of departments. I think because that's where advice and policy also sit as well. But to answer your question around, in particular, the climate change, the crowdfunding.
Abandoned it because the community came to the fore and supported.
Yeah, I think, the power, at the end of the day, we're responsible for the governments that we vote in. The power is in the people. And I think we need to reclaim that power. Such movements from the people to drive those important conversations dealing with the climate are extremely important. We've just seen how legislation can be repealed, as being part of the Truth and Treaty body, and being one of the authors of that treaty legislation. To see it repealed last night was absolutely heartbreaking. But I also am positive. I feel, as well as I feel the weight of that repeal by the government. But I think, communities like Sherwood have said, well, we don't need the government to do our truth telling. And once again, community is taking back control. And that's where I think for us as a society, as Queenslanders, whatever region that we live in, those changes are with the people. And it's about these groups here, organising, community. This is where we can have those dialogues. We can drive change here. And you may not think sometimes, it comes in waves, like Labor branches. Sometimes there's going to be a good year with a lot of members. Sometimes the year goes by and there's only a few members because people come and go. But I think, as we're seeing how, I think it's interesting in terms of politically. I think we're in a very interesting time as a country. I think we're in a very interesting time as political parties. And I think there's a real opportunity here for societies such as the Fabian Society to really galvanise community from grassroots level. And when you're talking about, climate change and those types of issues from a grassroots level are extremely important, because sometimes, like in the First Nations space, it becomes too hot. It becomes too hot. No one wants to touch us. The referendum was a great example of the disinformation and misinformation, and how that had a profound impact in every state, driving the treaty process. But again, it will come. It'll be from the grassroots that will drive that change. So look, I think I would just continue in forging those community groups, those grassroots groups or grassroots committees to drive, the larger cause or the cause. If that answered your question.
Any other questions?
Aaron.
Just stand there. It's
He's quite tall, actually. Let me lean back.
Thanks for your speech. It was quite inspiring, actually. The only other time I've really seen you was on TV, and some of your scenes with Stephen Oliver at bus stops and the scenes.
Yes, yes, I'm sure.
Quite different, quite memorable.
Quite different, yes.
It's where do you think the points of engagement with this new government in Queensland, what it might be? Because I don't see them at the moment. Just where you see that discussion and that dialogue headed, perhaps.
Yeah, that's.
I don't know what their policy is.
Well, we don't know anything at the moment, do we? No, we're not.
That's right. So you've talked about the need for dialogue. Where do you think it happens with these guys? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a great question. Tough question, because if I think about what was executed last night, and thinking about truth telling, and thinking about the Treaty Institute, where do we see that dialogue taking place? I think I think one there's need for community action is one thing, and through the branches, through the Fabian Society, groups that are organised, and I mean, if I think about the First Nation space, I think for us, it will be for when they will be looking for assistance, and is waiting for that opportunity and being ready and being organised for that opportunity. I think it's a bit too early at the moment to really kind of to see where those opportunities are, but those opportunities will arise. But I think it's just about being organised and being ready and to be on the front foot until you continue into having our dialogues within our groups, within our advocacy groups. Look, I think because I think it's a bit too early yet.
Any other questions? Oh. You first.
G'day, Aaron. I'm Cal. I'm a Condamika man. Bit of a mixed bag of heritage as well.
Oh, we all are.
I've just recently, the last couple of years, been working in government, and I've just started getting into youth work, and seeing somebody like you who's been in the entertainment, pop culture industry, how do you feel about how do we go about inspiring the younger Indigenous generation, given that the new government's intention is to bring about the youth crime agenda? And we all know a lot of that youth crime agenda will be weaponised against a lot of people from our First Nations backgrounds. How do you see about us inspiring the next generation of Indigenous people?
You just throw me all curveballs. Look, I think that there's a real opportunity there to again. I think there's an opportunity for our First Nations traditional owner groups from our our elders and our cultural leaders to really lean into that particular space. For those that are engaging in, that are still all engaging in cultural practices, to I think there's an opportunity there for those First Nations groups and youth organisations to engage in that space, because I think it's about identity as well, and it's been that loss of identity for some of our youth, and it's complex. But I think the more that we can engage our elders to drive cultural well-being with youth organisations, that some sort of dialogue to develop a framework around, keeping our youth engaged from a cultural perspective, having our elders engage to pass on their knowledge of country, law, and programs that will be able to foster a narrative or some sort of framework about walking in two worlds, and keeping solid to your identity and your cultural values and understanding law. I think there's certainly opportunity there in that. I think I think the more that we can integrate culture with our youth organisations, and having our elders lead that space, our cultural lawmen and our cultural law women, our matriarchs in that space. I think there's an opportunity for dialogue to happen or take place, because I don't think if it is existing, I'm not aware of it. But I think certainly that could be a way of forging some sort of solution. And it's 65,000 years of law, frameworks, cultural and societal cohesion. We've got it. But it's about how are we giving the allowance to actually lead that, and to be able to integrate that and work together in co-designing a cultural youth programs that are able to, we take everybody on the journey. Yeah. And in some way we allow that truth telling to take place as well too. Yeah. I'm just riffing. Yeah, I'm just off the cuff. I'm just riffing. Yeah.
We'll just
I'd like
make
to make
this.
a couple of observations, if I may.
Just a moment. We'll just make this the last question, because I'm sure Aaron would like to eat.
All good. Oh, I've had this, haven't I? Oh. I came out to Australia when I was 12 in 1960, and sat the leaving certificate in 1964 and did Australian history honours. And I was quite interested to know that there wasn't a single mention in the curriculum about Indigenous people at all. And it was some years before I realised that there were actually Indigenous people and the importance of them. When I ran for Labor in Baramba, Joe's old seat of Baramba in 98, my darling and I were the first people ever to door knock Sherbet. We went through and the people, got to know the people very, very well, and they were just wonderful. Auntie Penny Bond, I remember particularly, and they did afternoon teas for us and all that sort of thing. I didn't win, strangely enough, but it's just that then I started to think more about our Indigenous brothers and sisters. And when I went to Venezuela in 2008, I came back and, of course, immediately joined the Socialist Alliance and got to know Uncle Sam Watson. Did you know Sam? What a wonderful man, but what a beacon of hope between two different communities. And he really did some good work. But my later opinion is that when the relatives of my forebearers invaded this country and destroyed the existing culture, they displaced a culture that was far superior to ours because they didn't fight wars over land like we did, and they didn't worship money. Anyway, that's it. I just wanted to make that observation for what it's worth. But all the best. And I now spend a lot of time. I've been to the yarning circle at Brighton Health Campus and those sort of places. So I spend as much time as I can trying to identify with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors on Torres Strait, if you ever think of getting elected and starting to be a politician?
Yeah, no, I'd rather work in the background and come and speak at Fabian Society and be part of Labor branches. I think, yeah, politics is it scares me.
No.
I've seen what they do.
Oh, yes.